The rain wasn't poetic. It was a miserable, city-gray sheet of water that hammered against the panoramic windows of Aurelia, turning the glittering skyline into a watercolor bleed. Inside, the air was warm, thick with the scent of truffle oil and old money. For Rhiannon, it was the smell of the end of a 14-hour double shift. Her feet were a dull, distant ache, her starched white shirt felt like cardboard against her skin, and the red vest and black bow tie were a cage she'd been trapped in since noon. Just one table left. Booth 12. The dark leather crescent in the corner that the senior staff always found a way to avoid. It was occupied by 4 men, their suits so dark they seemed to absorb the low, golden light of the restaurant. They spoke in a language that hummed just beneath the polite clatter of silver on porcelain, a low, guttural cadence that felt both intimate and exclusionary.
Korean.
She knew it instantly, the sound of it a phantom limb from a childhood spent a world away. The man in the center, the one the others orbited like nervous planets, was unnervingly still. He hadn't said much, but every time he shifted, the air in the booth tightened. His hair was black, shot through with surprising threads of silver at the temples that belied the unlined severity of his face. He possessed a kind of predatory calm, the stillness of a panther watching its prey from a high branch. Rhiannon approached, her professional smile plastered on like a second skin. She was a ghost, an extension of the restaurant's decor, and that was how she liked it. She moved with an economy born of exhaustion, clearing plates, refilling water glasses, her presence meant to be felt but not seen. She didn't make eye contact. She just wanted to get this done, clock out, and walk the 7 rainy blocks to her tiny apartment. As she reached for the final empty bread plate, the man in the center spoke, not to his companions, but to her. His English was perfect, a low baritone completely devoid of an accent, which was somehow more jarring than if he'd had won. "You work very hard," it wasn't a question. It was an observation, cool and analytical. The other men fell silent, their attentions snapping to her. Rhiannon felt a prickle of unease. "It's the job, sir," she said, her voice a practiced, neutral murmur. He smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. They were dark, flat, like polished river stones. He gestured to the briefcase on the seat beside him. One of his men opened it. Inside, neat stacks of $100 bills were packed tight. It was an impossible amount of money, more than she'd ever seen outside of a movie. The man, this quiet, dangerous man who was clearly a very powerful mafia boss from the way the others deferred to him, reached in and pulled out 5 thick, paper-banded stacks. He fanned them out on the table like a hand of cards. $500,000, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was more menacing than a shout. "I will give this to you, right now, if you can say a single, complete sentence to me in my own language." His men chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. It was a game. A rich man's cruel sport. They were laughing at her, the tired black waitress in the cheap uniform. He was dangling a fortune in front of her, certain she couldn't possibly grasp it. She looked at the money, and for a dizzying second, she saw her student loans erased, her mother's mortgage paid, a life without the bone-deep weariness that was her constant companion. Then she looked at his face, at the smug certainty in his dark eyes. He saw her as an object, a piece of entertainment. And something inside her, a stubborn, quiet little flame that 14 hours of labor couldn't extinguish, flickered to life. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and met his gaze directly. "Your money is an insult," she said, her voice clear and steady, her Korean formal and unnervingly fluent. "And you are boring me. Please excuse me."
Mignon frosse.
The world, which had always moved according to his will, obeying the silent laws of fear and power he dictated, simply stopped. The air in the booth became thick, heavy, unbreathable. His men, who had been chuckling a moment before, were now statues, their faces slack with disbelief. The sound of the woman's voice echoed in the sudden, ringing silence. It wasn't just that she spoke the language, it was how she spoke it. The pronunciation was flawless, the grammar precise, the honorifics perfectly applied. It was the Korean of a diplomat or a scholar, not the broken phrases of a tourist. And the words themselves, they were a clean, sharp slap. An insult. You are boring me. No one had spoken to him like that in 20 years. Not since he had consolidated power and become the man whose name was only ever whispered. He watched her turn and walk away, her back straight, her movements unhurried. She did not look back. He saw the name stitched in red thread on her vest, Rhiannon. He had offered her a fortune and escape, and she had dismissed him, as if he were nothing more than a minor annoyance. He was the most feared Korean mafia boss on the eastern seaboard, a man who could make fortunes disappear and people vanish with a single, quiet phone call. And this girl, this exhausted waitress with tired eyes and an unbreakable spine, had looked him in the face and found him wanting. The amusement he had felt moments before curdled into something else entirely. It was a sharp, unfamiliar sensation, a complex chord of shock, fury, and a terrifying, electrifying curiosity. Who was she? How could a person with so little have so much pride? He had built an empire on understanding human weakness, on knowing the precise price of any person's loyalty or fear. But Rhiannon, it seemed, was not for sale. A slow, dangerous smile touched Minjun's lips. The game was no longer boring. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of anxiety. Every time the kitchen door swung open, Rhiannon expected to see one of the men from booth 12 coming to inform her she was fired. Or worse. She mechanically wiped down counters, polished silverware, and restocked salt shakers, her mind replaying the scene over and over. The sheer recklessness of her words appalled her. She had provoked a man who was clearly dangerous, a man who carried $500,000 in cash as pocket money. She was an idiot, a tired, proud idiot. When she finally clocked out, the rain was still coming down. Relentless assault on the city. She pulled the hood of her thin jacket over her head and stepped out of the restaurant's warm glow into the cold, wet dark. A black sedan, sleek and silent as a shark, was idling at the curb. It was the same car she'd seen the men arrive in. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. She started to walk faster, her worn sneakers splashing through puddles, but the car kept pace with her, its engine a low, predatory purr. The back window slid down with a soft whir. It was one of the men from the booth, his face impassive. "Mr. Khan would like to offer you a ride home," he said. It was phrased as an offer, but the tone was an order. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at her to run, to say no, to disappear into the labyrinth of wet city streets. But another part of her, the part that had spoken out in the restaurant, was tired of being scared. She was tired of her small, constrained life. And more than anything, she was curious. She stopped, turned, and looked at the open car door. It was a portal to another world, a world of danger and power she had no business entering. She thought of her overdue bills, the leak in her ceiling, the gnawing exhaustion that never seemed to leave her. What did she really have to lose? Taking a deep breath that did little to calm her racing heart, she walked to the car and slid into the cool leather of the back seat. The door closed with a heavy, final thud, sealing her inside a world of silence and expensive leather. Minjun was sitting in the opposite corner of the spacious back seat, looking out at the rain-streaked city lights. He didn't turn to look at her as she settled in, but she felt his awareness of her like a physical pressure. The car pulled smoothly away from the curb, the city noise muted to a distant hum. The silence stretched, thick and charged. She stared at her own hands, twisting the worn strap of her backpack in her lap. She could feel him watching her now, his gaze analytical. "You were born in Seoul," he said. It wasn't a question. "My parents were medical missionaries," she replied, her voice tight. "We lived there until I was 12. That explained the language, but not the defiance." It didn't explain why she had thrown his offer back in his face. "That money," he began, his voice still low and even, "could have changed your life. Some changes aren't worth the price," she said, finally finding the courage to look at him. His face was unreadable in the shifting shadows. "Everything has a price," he countered smoothly. "You simply disagreed with mine," he paused, letting the statement hang in the air. I am opening a new division of my company. A legitimate one. Imports and exports. It requires a great deal of negotiation with partners in Seoul. I need a translator. A cultural advisor. Someone who understands the nuances that a simple bilingual person would miss. He named a salary that made her head spin. It was more than her father, a surgeon, had ever made in a year. It is a professional arrangement, he continued, his eyes locking onto hers. Your skills are valuable to me. I am willing to pay for them. No other obligations, it was a lie, and they both knew it. This wasn't about her language skills. It was about her. He was a collector of rare things, and he had just found a priceless artifact he didn't understand. He wasn't offering her a job, he was offering her a gilded cage, a way to keep her close until he could figure her out.
She took the job.
Her best friend, Chloe, a pragmatic nursing student who had seen Rhiannon through every bad decision since high school, called her certifiably insane. A Korean Mafia boss, Rhi? Are you kidding me? You think he's hiring you for your scintillating grasp of business honorifics? He's going to eat you alive. Rhiannon knew Chloe was probably right. But the offer was a lifeline she was too desperate to refuse. The office was on the 48th floor of a gleaming glass skyscraper, a sterile, minimalist space that screamed corporate legitimacy. Her desk was mahogany, her computer was state-of-the-art, and the view of the city was breathtaking. The work itself was surprisingly real. She translated dense legal contracts, sat in on video conferences with serious-faced executives in Seoul, and drafted correspondence that navigated the treacherous waters of international business etiquette. She was good at it. Her competence was a shield, a suit of professional armor she wore every day. Min-jun was a constant, quiet presence. He was rarely in the main office, preferring his own private suite, but she always felt him there. He would appear silently in her doorway to ask a question about a contract, or summon her to a meeting where he would sit in his characteristic stillness, observing everything. She began to see the machinery of his power. It wasn't in loud threats or displays of violence. It was in the way powerful men deferred to him, the way a single, quiet word from him could end a negotiation, the palpable fear and respect he commanded without ever raising his voice. Yet in the quiet moments she saw other things. She saw the way he would watch her when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression not predatory, but something closer to puzzled wonder. She saw the faint lines of fatigue around his eyes that his perfect suits couldn't hide. She was a complication in his perfectly ordered world, and he didn't know what to do with her. The tension between them was a constant, low hum, a wire pulled taut that vibrated with every shared glance, every professional exchange. She was losing herself, just as Chloe predicted, but not to fear. She was losing herself to a reluctant, terrifying warmth. One night, they were the last two in the office. A storm had blown in, a furious echo of the night they'd met, and the city below was a glittering, rain-lashed tapestry. They had been working for hours on a difficult negotiation, and the air was thick with shared exhaustion. Min-jun had dismissed his driver. They were alone, suspended 48 floors above the world. He was standing by the window, his back to her. "Why did you come back to the States?" he asked, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. The question was personal, a deliberate step across the professional line they had so carefully drawn. "My father got sick," she said, the memory still a dull ache. "We had to come back for his treatment. He passed away 2 years later." She hadn't meant to share that much, but the quiet of the room and the drumming of the rain against the glass pulled the words from her. He turned from the window, his face shadowed. "I am sorry for your loss." There was a genuine note of sympathy in his voice that caught her off guard. "And your mother?" "She moved back to her hometown in Alabama. She worries about me here." Rhiannon gave a small, humorless laugh. "If she knew where I was working, she'd have a heart attack." He was silent for a long moment, studying her. "My father," he said, his voice dropping even lower, "built this enterprise.
He was a hard man.
He taught me that emotion is a weakness, that caring for someone makes you vulnerable. He died believing that it was the most he had ever revealed about himself, a tiny crack in the marble facade. He was telling her in his own way that she was making him vulnerable. The space between them crackled with unspoken things. The danger he represented, the impossible chasm between their worlds. It all seemed to fade away, leaving just two people, alone in a tower, sharing a moment of fragile, unexpected honesty. The professional arrangement was a ruin, and they were standing in the wreckage, finally seeing each other clearly. The crisis came without warning, a violent intrusion into the sterile quiet of their professional world. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Minjun was in a meeting across town, and Rhiannon was heading out to pick up lunch. As she stepped out of the elevator into the building's marble lobby, she felt the shift in the atmosphere. Two men in tracksuits were standing near the revolving doors, trying too hard to look casual. They weren't Minjun's men. Her blood ran cold. One of them met her eyes, and a slow, ugly smile spread across his face. He nodded to his partner.
She didn't think.
She just turned and ran back toward the elevators, fumbling for her phone. They were after her. She was a tool, a way to get to Minjun. A vulnerability. She stabbed at the elevator button, her hands shaking. The door slid open and she threw herself inside, just as one of the men lunged for her, his fingers brushing the back of her jacket. She jabbed the button for the 48th floor and collapsed against the wall as the doors slid shut. She called Minjun. Her voice was a ragged whisper.
Lobby.
Two men. They're coming up. The line went silent for a beat, and then his voice came back, transformed. The calm, controlled man was gone. In his place was something cold, ancient, and absolutely lethal. Lock the main office door. Go to my private suite and lock that door too. Do not open it for anyone but me. Do you understand? She did as he said, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She barricaded herself in his office, listening to the terrifying silence. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then she heard it, a loud bang from the outer office, followed by shouting. A crash. And then silence again. A key turned in the lock of the suite. The door swung open.
Minjun's suit.
His suit was immaculate, but there was a dark splash of blood on his white cuff. His face was a mask of cold fury, but his eyes, when they found hers, were wild with a terror that mirrored her own. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his hands framing her face, his thumbs stroking her cheeks as if to assure himself she was real. The control was gone. The Korean Mafia boss was gone. In his place was just a man, terrified of losing the one thing he could not replace. He took her not to her apartment but to his, a sprawling penthouse that felt more like a fortress in the sky. The silence in the car was absolute, a heavy blanket of shock and adrenaline. He didn't let go of her hand the entire way. Once inside, he led her to a massive bathroom of black marble and chrome, his movements still tight with a barely suppressed violence. There was a thin, shallow scratch on her forearm from where the man's fingers had grazed her jacket. It was nothing, but he treated it like a mortal wound. He gently cleaned the scrape with an antiseptic wipe, his touch surprisingly tender. The clinical act seemed to anchor him, to bring him back from the precipice of whatever cold rage he had just unleashed in the office downstairs. When he was done, he looked up at her, and the last of his composure finally shattered. The powerful, untouchable man who commanded a criminal empire looked utterly broken. "When you called," he began, his voice rough, hoarse with emotion, "when I heard the fear in your voice, I realized my father was wrong." He sank to his knees before her, taking her hands in his. It was a gesture of such complete surrender it stole her breath. "Vulnerability is not a weakness," he whispered, his forehead resting against their joined hands. "Living without feeling anything, that is weakness. And before you I was weak. I was a ghost in my own life." He looked up, and the raw, unguarded truth in his dark eyes was devastating. "Seeing you in danger, it didn't just make me vulnerable. It made me real. You make me real, Rhiannon." He took a ragged breath. "I love you. It is the only true thing I have ever known." The confession hung in the silent, sterile room, more powerful than any threat, more valuable than any amount of money. The great and terrible Minjun, the Korean Mafia boss, was undone. Not by a rival or a bullet, but by a quiet waitress who had refused to be bought. Rhiannon looked down at the man kneeling before her. This was the man Chloe had warned her about, the man whose world was built on fear and shadow. He was danger and violence and 100 things she should run from. But he was also the man who had shown her a sliver of his past in a rain-lashed office, the man whose carefully constructed world she had somehow cracked open just by being herself. She thought of her old life, a life defined by the relentless grind of exhaustion and debt. It was a safe life, a small life. This life, with him, was anything but safe. It was a tightrope walk over a terrifying abyss. But here, in this moment, with his defenses stripped away and his heart laid bare, she felt a profound sense of coming home. This complicated, dangerous man saw her, not as a waitress, not as a translator, but as the one true thing in his life. And in his vulnerability, she found her own strength. She reached out, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, the harsh planes of his face softening under her touch. She didn't need to say the words. He could see the answer in her eyes. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by something far greater, a deep, quiet certainty. This was her choice. This was her life now. He rose slowly to his feet, his eyes never leaving hers. He held her face in his hands, as he had in the office, but this time there was no terror, only a fragile, wondering hope. "Be my wife, Rhiannon," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Be the anchor in my storm." She didn't answer with words. She leaned in and pressed her lips to his, a silent vow, a commitment made not in a church, but here, in the aftermath of violence, in a fortress in the sky. It was a fragile beginning, a promise of a life that would always be lived on the edge. But as he held her, she knew, with a certainty that calmed her trembling soul, that she would never be alone in the dark again.